Welcome friends. Welcome Haven String Quartet. It is so good to see everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. This is our very first playing images online. We've, for the past 10 years, done this in the gallery in front of original works of art with an audience of maybe up to 100. And today, because we're online, we get to do a couple of things in more detail. One item in particular is that normally we have children sit in the front so that they can see, but today everybody gets a front row seat. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce my colleagues from the Haven String Quartet. Maybe you all could just introduce yourselves, say a little bit about what you do, what you play, and then we'll move into what we're going to do today.
Sure. Hi, Jessica.
Hi,
And it
Yaira.
is really exciting to be here. And I'm so glad, despite of everything, we were still able to continue this programming. And this is our 10th year. So it's super exciting. My name is Yaira Matyakub, and I'm the violinist at the Haven String Quartet. And I'm here with my colleagues, Philippe Boulanger, the cellist of the Haven String Quartet, Annalisa Berner, the violist of the Haven String Quartet, and Gregory Tompkins, violinist of the Haven String Quartet.
Wonderful. So today, excuse me, we are going to be listening and looking, and we're going to be thinking together about what it means to hear music while looking at art and to look at art while hearing music, and to think about what new things you see and what new things you hear when these senses are combined. And we're really excited today that our theme is really about friendship. Friendship among people, friendship among artists, among ourselves, and also ideas of layering of histories, layering of stories, and even layering within the making itself. So we will begin with an image of the two artists we're focusing on today. Our composer today is an African-American composer named William Grant Still. And our artist today is an African-American painter named Hale Woodruff. And both of these men were contemporaries. The art we're looking at today is going to be from 1958, and the music is from 1960. And what's also really exciting is the painting that we're going to see on the next screen is a brand new piece in the collection of the Yale University Art Gallery. It came to the museum in October, and it is not yet on view. It's in the conservation lab right now being looked at and studied. And we're hoping that this piece will be a piece that we come back to often, both for teaching, but also for different kinds of programs. So many different parts of the museum and departments intersect with the ways we can look at this object. But for us today, we want this to be really a close look and a close listen. So on the next slide, we're going to take away all the text. Excuse me. Take a moment to see where your eye goes. See what you notice, see what you imagine happening. And we are going to listen to the opening part of the first movement of William Grant Still's lyric quartet, While We Look. And please feel free to use the chat feature so that if you have thoughts, you can share them there. There's also a Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. This is a place where you can add questions, and we have a colleague, Jillian Cowley, who will be answering questions now. And at the end, we will have an opportunity to talk to the quartet and ask them questions directly. One other thing before we listen, for those of you who are viewing it on a computer screen today, at the top of your screen, there is a green bar that says you are viewing Elizabeth Kitson's screen, and to the right, it says View Options. If you click on View Options and pull down, there is towards the bottom, a word or a set of words that says side-by-side mode. If you click on this, you will be able to see all of us on the right and the image on the left, and then you can control how much of us or the image you want to see. So that's just a note for you to think about. Anyway, now on to listening and looking, and we will come back and talk about your observations in just a moment. So I would love, if anyone wishes to add any comments in the chat of things that you are noticing. And when you write in the chat, you're able to write it just to us or to the whole group to see. So when I've shared this with other people, and when I've just noticed right now is when I'm listening and looking, I'm wondering about the relationship between the two figures in the painting. And I feel like there's a back and forth that happens. And someone's just noticing that they're hiding their cards. Maybe they don't trust each other in this game. Some cards are played on the table. It's not clear what the game is that they're playing. And then is this contemplation before the next move? Someone else is saying that the music sounded like there's a conversation happening, sometimes with individual voices and sometimes together. And then the other thought is, what comes first, the music or the painting and the conversation? The blue figure might feel pretty defensive in the way it's being portrayed. And it looks like the cards are falling off. Could this be intentional? And the answer is yes, this is very intentional. And we'll get more into Hale Woodruff's style a little bit later. Someone else is noticing that the bodies feel drawn. Is it a public space? Is it a home? Is it a club of some sort? So wondering about the setting this is taking place in. And people were drawn to the colors and the textures and the actual brush strokes, even more so than what's actually happening in the painting, that there's a vibrancy to what people are seeing. Some people are wondering how much they had to drink. The glasses are empty. And then people are also thinking about the relationship between these two figures. Uh, how well do they know each other? Is the person in green with their hand against the face, are they about to say something? Are they being contemplative? It's abstract intimacy. Uh, I love these observations from people, and it's making me notice also the idea of layering in particular, and that we have this layering of story and layering of observation. On the next slide, we can get in a little bit more closely. Uh, and we can see that there's even a layering within the paint. I think it was Cezanne who says that I paint like I draw and I draw like I paint, or paint when I draw and I draw when I paint. And Woodruff pulled on this as well. And what you see here, this blue, is not a drawing underneath, but it's a painting. So he painted a sketch that he then fills in. Then there's a wonderful set of comments about wondering about the psychology or the feelings of the individuals, and then more about the layering. And on the next slide is another spot where we see this blue as the original mark, and then over it, these other colors that show us kind of a vibrancy of motion. So this idea of layering is really central to the music. And I think, Yaira, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what, from your perspective, is happening with William Grant Still and the music and this concept of layering and friendship?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Jess. Before we get into the detailed part about the layering and how it applies in music, I want to say a few words about the composer, William Grant Still. So, by the time William Grant Still composed his lyric quartet in 1960, he was a well known composer and a conductor with nearly 200 works ranging from symphonies, opera, ballets, and film scores. William Grant Still and his musical style incorporates a variety of African American influences, from spirituals to blues, as well as Latin American folk elements. This musical language is very clear in his lyric quartet. And the lyric quartet is a musical portrait of three friends. Each of the three movements characterizes and draws a musical picture of a friend. And each movement has its own title. So I'll read through those titles, even though today we will be just focusing on the first movement of the quartet. So the three movements are titled the sentimental one, the quiet one, and the jovial one. So today the quartet is going to play just the first movement, the sentimental one. And we will be focusing in depth on what makes this quartet the sentimental one, and how William Grant Still must have felt about his friend to dedicate this movement in describing the friend in sort of musical language. So as we move through different sections of the quartet, of the movement, right, we will be listening to some of the contrasting elements that bring this movement together. So when we speak about the layering in music, we think of the role of the each voice in harmonic structure and how all voices fit together. In the next example, we would like to break down this section into smaller bits to hear the harmonies moving in an even pace between violin 2 and the cello. So what you just heard was the opening of the quartet, the sentimental one. And next we're going to play the same passage, but we will add the viola line. And I would like you to hear how viola's faster moving notes have its own pace and almost coloring contours of harmonies for the violin and cello. So here's the next example. Yes, and finally, we hear all four instruments in the same passage and in this simple, friendly melody with elements of pentatonic scale. Let's listen to the opening of the sentimental one again. Further in this movement, the quartet gets into contemplative recitative-like conversation and the contrast and tension created by the drastic dynamic switches. Let's listen to the next example with the lower three voices. And now, with all four voices, the contrast of range and dynamics add to the conversation. The same passage with all four voices. Further in this movement, all four voices unite in a passage of moving, diminished triads, evoking the sense of suspense and uncertainty. Let's listen to these harmonies. Yes. And in our final example, uh, we would like to show you the contrasting material to what we just heard. And in this next section, we're going to hear playful, almost like a dance, with elements of humorous turns and changes. And this playfulness kind of brings me back to the game of cards and the card players. And before we hear this last example, I want to read the quote that William Grant Still wrote. It was on the sketches of his score. And as we think about this musical portrait with the title of Sentimental One, I cannot help but think what William Grant Still must have felt and how he felt about his friend to write this movement in such a way. So here is the quote. It reads, I am now home. I have come home where I may enjoy the happiness that comes from the companionship of friends.
Yaira, that is just so wonderful. I love this idea that you come home to the companionship with friendship. And I've been reading the chat as I was listening and hearing people imagine the relationship between these two figures and to be thinking about, is there a conversation? Is there a back and forth? The fact that they are really facing us, even though they're at sides of a table, um, it allows us to kind of imagine two sides of it, like their own relationship plus the relationship that we engage in when we start to look at them on the page with us. Uh, I'm really interested to see if people have more thoughts now about what they're noticing as they've heard these sort of layered, nuanced look at what the music does. And I think that we can look also at the composition as a whole at this moment and think really about the details that we're noticing. I know that we can go in more deep, sorry, we can look more deeply at the individual parts of the painting, and Elizabeth's going to help us move through this. So, starting with the figure in blue, some people were noticing the wine bottle with two glasses and really wondering, is this associated just with him? Or, sorry, with this figure, we don't know the genders for sure. Or was this just on this side of the painting? And same with that green plant. And if we get even closer, we see more of those blue lines that we were talking about at the beginning that outline, that he then fills in with color. And then these cards that are both flat and have a little bit of depth as well. And some people are commenting that they may be distrustful of each other. I mean, this is what happens when you play cards. You don't necessarily, you're questioning each other's uh, next play, how it all fits together. There's an adversarial relationship, even if you are good friends. And then the next picture is of the green figure with up closer the checkerboard behind him. And if we get even closer in here, I was meeting with one of our conservation colleagues who was taking me through a really close look at this painting to see what possibly has changed to it over time. And one of the things she pointed out to me that I hadn't noticed at first look is that if you look really closely at the checkerboard, there's a square of 4 by 4 of white and blue. And then towards the top of that, the upper half of that checkerboard, there's a darker set of colors of gray and sort of blackish red and white across the top. So he revised it as he went. So if this was a portrait, we would associate this checkerboard with this person possibly as his attribute of game playing. Um, yeah, people are saying that these are intense experiences of playing games with one another. Some of you also were referring to various images you'd seen in your own looking at art that made you think about these faces and their abstract nature or their mask-like nature. I wanted to share with you a couple of things that we had thought about and we've also found in the research that we've done. Not to say that Hill Woodruff was using these as like a one-to-one connection, but more that these were in his mind when he painted. For instance, Picasso's La Demoiselle d'Avignon, which Jillian's going to put a link to in the chat. He was very influenced by Picasso and really thought a lot about his work, Modigliani's work, Brancusi's work, and other early modernists' work and abstract artists' work to think about how forms were shared and shown. On the next slide, though, we're also going to see some African art that he was aware of, both because he had books and he was studying African art, but also because he collected it himself. And so we are not saying here that this image on the left is then copied into the painting on the right, but we do know that this is a book that this plate and the next one on the next slide are plates that were from a book that he had in 1920 or 21 that was given to him by a mentor. And they were things that he was paying attention to. And he wrote about African art saying, I've tried to study African art in order to assimilate it into my being, not to copy, but to seek the essence of it, its spirit and quality as art. And I just want us to keep this in mind that everything, and we're gonna learn more in a moment about his relationship with Cezanne, but before we get there, we're gonna look back at the whole room and sort of take this in as we go. But I just want us to think about he says throughout his work that he doesn't copy other artists. He takes from what he's learning and assimilates it into his own making. On the next slide, we go back to the full room. And in his lifetime, he also studied with Diego Rivera. He sought out tutelage from Henry Osawa Tanner when he was in Paris. He was really interested in understanding um, just the range of art that was being made and also different styles that existed and that could exist. So going back to your observations, I'm seeing people write about the figures again and the way in which the wrists are twisted and moving and how there's even like a spiral notion to how it all feels. And then in the room itself, people are noticing that they keep coming back to this wine glass. So on the next slide, we can give you a close-up of it. The two glasses and the bottle. And here you can see the sketchiness and the vigorousness that he uses to put the paint down. And I'll say that in looking closely at the painting, it's not a very thick application, but it's a lot of layers. Um, and on the next slide, we go back to the plants. And again, thinking about this layering and application of paint and also the dimensions of the room. So back to our home base of the painting itself, some people had been noticing the space feels, they were wondering where the space was and what kind of space it could be. We do know that when Hill Woodruff was studying in Paris, he and his friend Palmer Hayden spent a lot of time in cafes and also really seeking out, like looking at art in galleries. And one of the artists who was most influential, according to Hill Woodruff's own writing, was Cezanne. So if we go to the next slide, Paul Cezanne used the card players for himself as a motif that he came back to for a series of paintings about playing cards. And if you go to the next slide, Elizabeth, thank you. We can look at the relationship between a version he did of the painting that we've been talking about. He did this version in 1930, and we can look more closely at it on the next slide. And to think about what has changed in this slide compared to what we were looking at in the painting that we were looking at together a moment ago. I'm noticing that the plant is now on the right. The checkerboard is now associated with the figure in blue. The bottle is on the right. and there's only one glass, and the angularity is different, and the brushstrokes are completely different. And then in the next slide, we can look at them together. And I don't know, just take a moment to see what you're seeing that he has changed between these two paintings. So it feels like a darker mood in one versus the other. He loosens up the cubism, the lighting is different. Absolutely, these are really interesting observations. They're kind of mirror images to one another, except they're also mirror images of different styles almost. Uh, Smoother flowing motion, different table planes. It's the same conversation with just different attributes associated with the different figures. Well, something else happens. In 1978, he revisits this painting again in preparation for an exhibition and changes things back, but still forward. So there's this change again in what happens. Um, yeah, so what also people are noticing that the card player, the green card player's hand is visible in both the 1930 and the 1978 version. But the one that we've been spending our time with in 1968, the green card player's hands are not visible. We don't know what cards that person has ready to play. So let's go back to the painting that we've been looking at closely here. And what I'd love for us to do now is to hear the whole first movement from beginning to end. I've been able to have the painting superimposed over with the video, so you'll be able to see it all together. And while you're looking and listening, just think about all these things that you have been noticing and how everything's fitting together. And after you look and listen to this movement played by the Haven String Quartet, we will open this up to Q&A and we'll have a conversation with the quartet about this whole experience and this connection. Please feel free to put questions in the chat, questions in the Q&A as you're listening if you would like. It'll let us sort of think in our minds about what we'll address. And we'll see you after the movement. Thank you. Thank you so much, friends with the Haven String Quartet. Um, it is just so wonderful to hear music performed in this moment, and this music in particular. Gregory, Philip, Annalisa, would you like to join us for some of these questions? I know people have been answering some of these as we go, but there seem to be some really lovely um, uh, thought that people are sharing, and I think it could be nice to take a moment to address some of them. Uh, I will start by saying that I wonder what it's like for you as a quartet to be thinking about art while also thinking about the music itself.
Yeah, well, just I'll chime in there. This is always such a fun project and fun process to be a part of. I think it, as I hope many of our participants are experiencing, that finding where the music and the art intersect, I think can add an enormous amount of depth and in sort of interest to both. And a lot of great comments about or sort of exploring what is their relationship between the sort of two card players. And, we think a lot when working on a piece, both, what is the composer's relationship, to this piece, and for something that is almost autobiographical in a way that this William Grant still is. That was something we thought a lot about too, because, each movement, as Yaira mentioned at the beginning, is a sort of a musical portrait of a friend. And somebody in the chat had also sort of hit on this idea that that our relationship with other people, we're reflected back in a way. And so that we're not just hearing a musical portrait of this friend of William Grant Stills, but his relationship with that person. And I feel like in this collaboration, working and thinking about a painting with similar ideas and themes has been really fun.
Thank you. We also have a couple of questions about why there are so many versions of this painting, and I can take a stab at this to say that we don't actually know we don't know the real reason. We don't know why he returned to this painting three times, this subject matter. We know that he was going to be in an exhibition. Hale Woodruff was going to be in an exhibition and wanted to put the card players in as a painting. And the way the story goes, he didn't like the way that the 1930 painting had looked by the time he was going to have the exhibition. It had come off its stretcher, it had been rolled up, and it felt to him not quite right. And so he revisited it. The 1958 version that we've been talking about today, we associate with that date because that's what was written on the back of the painting. But we don't yet know why he went back to it over time. And as I said at the very beginning, it's exciting to think that this painting can be a topic of research and a topic of further conversations as we begin to do more research into it and look more at it. We've also had questions about the music itself. And Yaira, someone was asking more about the pentatonic and the way we were describing the emotion of it. And do these actual words that you were using to describe the type of music have a relationship to the emotion that's being shared in the music? So like, does the pentatonic scale or do certain chord progressions, are they supposed to evoke a certain kind of feeling in a listener?
I can grab this one. The pentatonic scale is a really special scale because it's found all over the world in all kinds of folk music, and from Chinese folk music to African folk music, and then into African American folk music, as well as Mary Had a Little Lamb and Amazing Grace, and many songs that we also experience as a part of American folk music. So it's special in that it's very flexible, but it also has this sort of nature as a core fundamental block of music making all over the world. And it does bring in those folk elements that Grant Still was deliberately making references to that. And in that way differentiates it a little from the Western art music, the Beethoven, the Brahms, the Mahler that came right before it, which tends to rely on harmonies that have a different sensation and that have a sense of pull and tension and release that is a little bit different from what you heard here. So if you heard in this Grant Still a sense of openness or calmness, some of that might have had to do with the use of the pentatonic scale, as opposed to the drama and pull and intensity you might get in those composers that like Brahms, Beethoven, Mahler.
And Annalise, I'll just sort of add there because there was a question in the Q&A about any reference to Simple Gifts or even the Lark Ascending, another song. And I think that, all of those have elements of this pentatonic scale, both of those pieces. And so I think we're seeing that thread there. But Annalise, that thread is goes much further than just that.
There's also a question about how we together put these projects together, how we plan it, how we like what role we play in deciding what to do. Yaira, do you want to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what the process is like? And I can fill in around that what we do with the gallery part.
Sure. I have, I will share what it's like pre-COVID. So the pre-COVID time, we would meet at the museum. We would go through the galleries and we will see what's on display, and and then the research starts. We start digging into the art and the painter, and from our side, from Haven String Quartet side, we we see what in our repertoire would fit with this with the painting in terms of what is the most important thing that we want to what this painting to express, and how it all comes together. And sometimes we start with one idea, and then after research and rehearsals and meetings and the whole collaboration brings us to a new topic, so to speak, or like new idea that we want to share. And it's always a very fun experience and definitely filled with discoveries.
I would agree. And I would say that there's so much back and forth in the way we're thinking about how the art and music fit together. And I know from my own practice that thinking about the way that an image sounds, or how the sound of music with an image can help me think more deeply about the object itself, really influences how I go on and talk about that object later and teach from it later. And I also really appreciate how, when we collaborate on these kinds of projects, we are thinking about what the experience of the audience will be. And I think for this particular talk, what was special is because we're not in the gallery, we didn't have to worry so much about how much space we needed for the group to be in. And we didn't have to worry so much about how many people would fit, literally, and whether the orchestra, the quartet could fit in the space.
Yeah.
So it was
And
kind of
also the
happen
fact,
this way, right?
yeah, and also the fact that the both composer and the painter, they were contemporaries, right? Aren't they just a few years from each other, right? And William Grant Still was born in 1895.
And Hale
And
Woodruff was in 1900.
right, and so there are all these parallels in their lifetime that are similar and not, in a sense. So it's exciting to bring that into the scene.
I think so too. We're getting more comments. I wanted to be able to eliminate some of these from the Q&A itself. Someone asks or is talking about the way in which the figure on the left in all of the versions always is holding the hand, the cards facing in the hand facing the body, and it's it's important to the artist because that doesn't change, and that this person is wondering if this is about sort of the tension of playing the game. And then somebody else is asking, are they gambling? I think it could be so interesting to go in more depth to see what my own knowledge of the history of cards is very limited. And I mean, it could be poker, it could be rummy. I mean, there are a lot of things it could be, but we're not seeing the whole picture. And I also don't know if Woodruff really has a specific game in mind, or if this is part of sort of giving us samples of bits of information to make us want to learn more and to make us more engaged in the looking ourselves. I'm just glancing through the questions. And Quartet, please feel free to chime in on any of these that you see. So yeah, so whether or not the composer and artist knew each other personally, we do not have that information. It's very possible they knew of each other. I mean, um, William Grant Still's music was being performed a lot, and Hill Woodruff. They were both, part of the Harlem Renaissance. They were both mentored by Elaine Locke, and they were both very involved in their fields and in the arts in general. So it's not unlikely that they knew each other and that they knew of each other's work, but we don't know exactly in what way or what that looked like. So we have chosen not to go in that direction yet because we don't know that information yet.
I also think it's important to mention that William Grant Still, in his lifetime, he was, quote, first in many ways. He was the first African American conductor to conduct a symphony orchestra, Los Angeles Philharmonic. He was the first African American composer and conductor who had a radio broadcast. We're talking about 1940s. And he wrote a lot of music for film scores, though many of them were not credited to him. But he was, like paving the way for generations to come, and way ahead of his time in the way he saw how African American music and the influences of African American music could easily fit into the traditionally classical scene.
We've just had a really interesting comment made by Maisha Ostergren, who says that for herself, as an African American, I assumed the game was spades, which she grew up watching her grandma and aunts and uncles play. It's a game that she learned from her parents. And yeah, I think there are so many possibilities here. And like I said, we are just beginning to unpack what's happening. And then Adejoki is asking, could Hill Woodruff have been creating a counterculture or political statement by reappropriating the original painting, repeating it over decades? Possibly, very possibly. What he's painting here is not, it's not like the other styles that he was engaging in when he gets into the 60s and 70s. And so it's really a harkening back, but the subject is the topic that's harkened back to. The style matches more what happens as he moves along. And I'll also mention that Anna Vesoloma, who is in the conservation department, is also answering some of these questions because she's also doing work right now on the painting itself. So she's able to answer some of these things if you make them open. Any other thoughts or questions? This is so interesting. I have to say that when we're in person, this experience is, we know where the question's coming from because we see you eye to eye and we see where to look in the audience. And right now we're looking at two different parts of a screen, and so it feels a little bit disconnected. But I hope it still feels, for those of you at home, like there's continuity to it and not like we're just sort of reading texts randomly.
Jessica, if I can jump in.
Please.
I feel like there's an important element of this question of whether it's countercultural because of the way both the composer of the painting and the composer of the piece took their cultural elements and wove them into traditionally Western European styles and added the influence of their lives and their cultural context. And that's part of what makes each of these works so impactful is that.
I think so. I think so. As the questions I feel like are sort of, and the observations are starting to wind down a little bit, I'm wondering from the quartet, is there anything about Music Haven, the Haven String Quartet, that you want to share with folks, and any upcoming musical things that people should be aware of?
I can take that one, Jess. So for those of you guys who don't know, we are the Haven String Quartet, and we not only play concerts throughout the year, we also teach alongside our other resident musicians at Music Haven about 80 students twice, sometimes 3 times a week at our office in Erector Square in New Haven. And that has continued. At this point, we're almost entirely, I guess right now we're entirely virtual. But we have a really fun way of doing virtual programming where we have the Zoom Music Haven open from 3 to 6 every day. And so our students can come at any time and hang out with other folks in the Zoom room, and then we go pull them out into a breakout room for their lessons. But we're looking forward to getting back to doing in-person programming as soon as possible, hopefully, so that we can continue doing the other sorts of things we usually do with our students, including chamber music, chamber orchestra, all sorts of mentoring opportunities and concert trips, and just about anything and everything we can think of to create an artistically enriching experience for our students. So that's the education part of the work we do. And as far as the Haven String Quartet goes and the Music Haven resident musicians, we have a couple upcoming events that I know that you guys probably want to know about so that you can put them on your calendars and mark them down. I know they'll be on a slide in just a second, but in 2 weeks, Saturday, February 13th, we're going to have a concert, a virtual concert, available on YouTube. The quartet is going to perform Barber's String Quartet Opus 11, which is a fantastic piece if you don't know it. You probably know the middle movement, the slow movement, also known as Barber's Adagio. And we will be joined on that concert by Patrick Doan, who's also a resident musician at Music Haven, who will be performing some Paganini and a piece that he composed for solo violin. So that's Saturday, February 13th at 7:30. And there's the information right on the screen there. And then we also have one more virtual concert this spring, Saturday, March 20th. It's a solo spotlight concert featuring performances by Philippe Boulanger and Annalisa Berner. And they will be playing some really exciting works. Philip was going to be playing some Bach, and I think also a composer. I don't know, Philip, is this you playing the Alberga on the concert? Okay, great. And then Annalisa will be playing a piece by Shulamit Ran, and there will be a special performance by the quartet on that concert also. Even though it's a solo spotlight, we thought we'd stick a little something in there. And for those of you who haven't been to our virtual album drop concerts before, they're really easy to access. You can either go to our website at musichavenct.org/events, or you can find us on Facebook or Twitter or any social media that we're on, and there will be a YouTube link posted the day before the concert, and then you just click the link, it takes you to YouTube. You can do it on your mobile device, you can do it on your computer, your smart TV, whatever's easiest. And there's a Q&A session after each of those concerts too. So we hope to see you there for those.
There's also even a button right on the homepage, right when we get into that concert time, just musichavenct.org.
Thank you so much. I know we moved to this slide. The slide before this also has some thank yous that I just want to make sure people are recognized for their help with this today. Mark Mitchell, Jillian Cowley, Gavi Haskell, Elizabeth Kitson, Teo, Anna, and colleagues from all over the museum, including Liz Harnett, Marlene Theodore, Jake Gagne. We really appreciate the support, Rachel Thompson, of the folks who've been really supporting the project that we've been working on. And we look forward to doing this again in the spring sometime. We're still figuring out both the logistics of it and the timing and everything else, but we'll share what we learn when we do. Feel free to ask any other questions as you sign off, and we look forward to seeing you at another program coming up. Thank you so much. We don't know the date of the next one, so sometime in the future.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you,
Yaira.
Yale Arts Gallery team, for having us.
Our pleasure. And thank you from home for coming to our homes.